May 26, 1941, 21:10 hours. Approximately 300 miles west of Brest, France. A relentless Atlantic storm pounded the fragile biplane as it pressed forward. The Fairey's Swordfish shook violently under the assault of wind and rain, its canvas wings quivering with every gust. The pilot gripped the control column with both hands, battling the elements to maintain a steady course. Visibility was almost non-existent. Rain drove horizontally across the open cockpit, cutting into exposed skin like icy needles. Wind pierced the soaked leather flight suits, leaving crew members chilled to the bone. Ice quickly formed on their goggles, obscuring vision despite frequent wiping. Even thick gloves could not protect the pilot's hands from numbness. In the rear positions, the radio operator and observers huddled against the bitter cold. The temperature had fallen so far that any water in their containers had frozen solid. By this point, the Swordfish had been airborne for nearly 2 hours, 2 grueling hours navigating the storm, 2 hours scanning the ocean for a moving target, and 2 hours aware that even a successful strike offered no guarantee of survival. The altimeter indicated 800 feet. Just above the height of the towering Atlantic waves, which often reached 30 to 40 feet. Its landing gear was fixed, increasing drag and limiting performance, while its fabric-covered frame could easily be punctured by small arms fire. German intelligence reportedly dismissed the Swordfish as obsolete, a relic of the previous war, incapable of threatening a modern naval giant. Yet within 2 hours, 14 of these antiquated aircraft would manage what the British fleet had failed to accomplish, inflicting critical damage on the Bismarck and altering her fate. The origins of this unlikely naval weapon trace back to the early 1930s at Fairey Aviation in Hayes, West London. 1934, Hayes, West London. Engineers and draftsmen at Fairey Aviation were designing an aircraft that already seemed behind its time. The company, founded during the First World War by Charles Richard Fairey, had extensive experience producing carrier-based aircraft by the 1930s. Naval aircraft had unique requirements. They needed to locate enemy vessels, guide naval gunfire, deliver torpedoes effectively, and operate from carriers under challenging sea conditions. Reliability and ease of maintenance were critical. Exposure to saltwater, rough weather, and minimal repair facilities demanded durable and simple designs. The new project was designated TSR, Torpedo Spotter Reconnaissance. It was a 3-seat biplane powered by a Bristol Pegasus 3 M3 radial engine, generating about 690 horsepower. Its 2-winged structure, reinforced with wires and struts, was already becoming outdated by mid-1930s standards. Critics in the Air Ministry questioned investing in such an antiquated design, arguing that modern monoplanes offered superior speed, enclosed cockpits, and retractable landing gear. However, the biplane layout had practical advantages for carrier operations. Short flight decks, such as the 720-foot deck of HMS Ark Royal, required aircraft capable of taking off and landing at low speeds. The Swordfish's large wing area enabled slow, controlled landings around 67 miles per hour, much safer than faster modern alternatives. The open cockpit offered unobstructed observation over vast ocean areas. Simple construction meant that even significant battle damage could often be repaired aboard ship in hours rather than grounding the aircraft permanently. In combining slow speed, maneuverability, ease of maintenance, and resilience. The Swordfish embodied a pragmatic approach to carrier warfare. An approach that, despite its outdated appearance, would soon prove decisive against one of the most formidable warships of World War II. Although it looked outdated, the aircraft had been engineered with a focus on functionality and dependable performance. Its prototype first took to the skies on April 17, 1934, marking the start of what would unexpectedly become one of the Royal Navy's most enduring wartime aircraft. Test pilot Chris Stenerland conducted thorough trial flights across the Hampshire countryside, assessing handling, stability, and resilience. The evaluations were highly encouraging. The aircraft responded predictably to controls, maintained a steady course in flight, and tolerated minor pilot errors. Aircraft were delivered in July 1936 to 825 Naval Air Squadron aboard HMS Glorious. The Swordfish took over reconnaissance duties from the older Fairey Seal and replaced the Blackburn Baffin as a torpedo bomber. Pilots quickly came to trust the aircraft for its reliability. Its engines could run smoothly for hundreds of hours without significant mechanical problems, and the fabric-covered structure proved surprisingly tough. In one noted incident, a plane returned safely to base despite sustaining more than 200 bullet holes in its wings and fuselage. Ground crews could patch such damage swiftly using simple fabric repairs. Crew members soon nicknamed the aircraft String Bag, comparing it to the flexible string shopping bags common in 1930s Britain. Like those bags, the Swordfish could carry a wide range of ordnance, torpedoes, bombs, illumination flares, mines, or depth charges, depending on the mission. This versatility made it invaluable in naval operations. Production expanded rapidly. Fairey built 692 units at Hayes, while Blackburn Aircraft added 1,699 more at Sherburne in Elmet. By the end of production in August 1944, a total of 2,391 Swordfish had been manufactured. The aircraft remained in frontline service until VE Day in May 1945, outlasting even the Fairey Albacore, initially intended to replace it. While they did not achieve decisive hits, all aircraft returned safely, demonstrating the plane's resilience in dangerous conditions. A strategic turning point came on June 10, 1940, when Italy entered the war, introducing the Regia Marina's 6 battleships into the Mediterranean theater. These ships posed a serious threat to Britain's vital supply routes to Egypt and India via the Suez Canal. Direct confrontation could result in heavy losses which Britain could not risk. Instead, Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commander of the Mediterranean Fleet, devised a bold plan: attack the Italian fleet while it was anchored, potentially crippling it before deployment. The target was Taranto, Italy's main naval base in the south, and the operation was designated Operation Judgment. Swordfish aircraft was selected as the primary strike force. On the evening of November 11, 1940, HMS Illustrious positioned itself approximately 270 miles southeast of Toronto. 21 Swordfish were prepared in the carrier's hangar for a daring nighttime raid. Each plane carried specific ordnance, some with torpedoes, others with bombs or illumination flares. Torpedoes were modified with wooden fins to allow operation in the harbor's shallow waters of 30 to 40 feet, a solution that had never been tested in combat. At 8:35 p.m., the first wave of 12 aircraft took off, led by Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Williamson in a torpedo-equipped plane. 5 additional torpedo bombers followed, alongside 6 planes carrying bombs and flares. tank detached unexpectedly. Consequently, only 20 aircraft participated in the attack rather than the planned 21. The flight to Toronto lasted approximately 90 minutes. Crews maintained an altitude near 8,000 feet, navigating the dark Mediterranean using a combination of celestial navigation and dead reckoning. Observers calculated wind drift and ground speed meticulously, while pilots adhered strictly to their headings. Precision was critical. Even a small error in direction could cause the formation to miss the harbor entirely. Throughout the mission, strict radio silence was enforced. Any signal risked alerting Italian forces and compromising the operation. As the British aircraft neared Toronto, they encountered an unexpected sight. Despite the late hour, the harbor and city lights remained fully illuminated. Italian authorities, prioritizing espionage prevention over blackout precautions, had left the area brightly lit, a vulnerability that would prove costly. Italian naval commanders had assumed that the British would not risk a torpedo assault in a heavily defended harbor. Previous assessments suggested the shallow waters made such attacks impractical. Both assumptions proved false. Defensive measures had been prepared, including a planned barrier of 87 barrage balloons intended to impede low-flying planes. However, only 27 were deployed. High winds had grounded most of the rest. The incomplete defenses created gaps that the Swordfish pilots could exploit. The first wave arrived at the harbor at 11:07 p.m. Land batteries alone discharged over 13,000 shells, with naval guns contributing additional fire. The night sky was filled with tracer streaks and exploding shells, a chaotic combination of light and sound. Many Italian gunners lacked real combat experience. Although trained, the reality of facing agile biplanes at night proved difficult. Their efforts were vigorous but imprecise, struggling to target the low and maneuverable Swordfish aircraft. Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Williamson attacked the battleship Conte di Cavour, flying just 30 feet above the water and releasing his torpedo from roughly 200 yards. The explosion breached the hull below the waterline, flooding compartments and leaving the ship partially submerged. Williamson's plane was soon hit. He and his observer survived, but were captured. Lieutenant Neil Kemp successfully struck the modern battleship Littorio, followed by Lieutenant Charles Lamb, who scored a second torpedo hit on the same vessel. The battleship began taking on water rapidly. Shortly after midnight, the second wave arrived, illuminating the harbor again. Anti-aircraft guns renewed their fire. Lieutenant Gerald Bailey targeted the cruiser Gorizia, but his aircraft was destroyed, killing both him and his observer. Despite this loss, the remaining planes continued their assaults. During this phase, Littorio sustained a third torpedo hit. Caio Duilio was also struck, causing severe flooding that forced the ship to list. By 2:39 a.m., the mission concluded. 20 Swordfish had engaged the main Italian battle fleet and practiced torpedo attack procedures repeatedly. Reconnaissance photos provided detailed knowledge of harbor defenses, enabling disciplined execution. The results were significant. 3 Italian battleships were incapacitated. Conte di Cavour suffered catastrophic damage and sank to the shallow harbor floor, later raised, but never returned to active duty. Littorio required 7 months of repairs, and Caio Duilio remained out of service for a similar period after flooding damaged 2 boiler rooms. In one night, Italy's operational battleship force was cut in half. From 6 active battleships, only 3 remained immediately available. The Mediterranean balance shifted in Britain's favor, enabling safer convoy operations to Malta and more secure supply routes to Egypt. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commanding British naval forces in the Mediterranean, found himself able to contemplate operations that previously would have been considered too risky. In contrast, the Italian Navy adopted a markedly more conservative strategy, choosing to safeguard their remaining major warships rather than risk additional losses. The effects of this shift reached beyond the Mediterranean. Japanese naval planners studied the raid on Toronto in detail, extracting lessons about the capacity of aircraft launched from carriers to strike fleets even within the protective confines of harbor. In January 1941, a Japanese naval attaché visited Toronto, examining the wrecked vessels and consulting with Italian officers who had witnessed the attack. Each of these insights would be applied in the Pacific Theater. The Taranto raid confirmed that torpedoes launched from aircraft could inflict severe damage on capital ships at anchor and underscored the rising dominance of aircraft carriers as instruments of naval power. Even relatively slow, outdated aircraft such as the Fairey Swordfish could deliver devastating results when handled by proficient crews. Yet this operation was only a precursor to challenges that lay ahead. Within half a year, these same biplanes would face a far more formidable target. In May 1941, the German battleship Bismarck made its way into the Atlantic. At that time, it was the largest and most heavily armed vessel in the Kriegsmarine, displacing over 50,000 tons fully loaded. Armed with 8 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, protected by an armor belt exceeding 12 inches in thickness and capable of speeds up to 31 knots. Bismarck's mission was to disrupt Allied convoys supplying Britain. The Royal Navy immediately mobilized every available asset to intercept the battleship. On May 24, in the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland, Bismarck engaged the British battlecruiser HMS Hood, a symbol of British naval prestige. Hood, displacing roughly 42,000 tons and similarly armed with 15-inch guns, had long been considered nearly invulnerable. The confrontation was brief but catastrophic. Bismarck's gunfire struck Hood's deck, penetrating the relatively thin armor and detonating the aft magazine where massive amounts of cordite propellant was stored. Supply lines. The British Isles relied entirely on maritime transport for essential goods, from food and fuel to munitions and raw materials. Convoys were escorted by smaller warships, which stood little chance against a battleship of Bismarck's size. If unimpeded, the ship could inflict significant damage on merchant shipping, potentially starving Britain into submission. In response, the Admiralty launched a comprehensive search. Battleships and cruisers fanned out in wide patterns, destroyers reinforced the effort, and aircraft scoured the seas. Locating a single battleship in the vast Atlantic was a monumental challenge, compounded by early-stage radar technology and limited aircraft range. Even if sighted, Bismarck could outrun or outgun its pursuers. The British needed a way to slow or impair the vessel, targeting engines, steering, or speed to allow heavier ships to engage. For this mission, the Fleet Air Arm deployed torpedo bombers, specifically the Fairey Swordfish. The HMS Victorious, operating with the Home Fleet, carried the 825 Naval Air Squadron under Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, the same unit that had participated in Toronto. On the night of May 24, reconnaissance located Bismarck. Admiral John Tovey ordered an immediate strike. At 10 p.m., 9 Swordfish aircraft launched into worsening weather, with Esmond leading the attack. Despite low clouds, heavy rain, and turbulent seas, the planes pressed toward their target. They approached from multiple directions to divide defensive fire, flying directly into flak bursts and tracer rounds. Though Bismarck remained operational, the strike proved that even heavily defended ships could be reached and harassed by carrier-based torpedo aircraft. Over the following days, British forces continued pursuit across the Atlantic. Bismarck remained a potent threat, but its leaking oil left a visible trail. On May 26th, a Catalina flying boat sighted the battleship again as it approached the French coast, where port defenses and Luftwaffe protection could potentially secure its escape. The British faced a critical situation. Admiral Tovey's battleships were positioned too far away to prevent the German battleship Bismarck from reaching safety. Only one nearby asset offered a realistic chance of interception: the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. Ark Royal accelerated to close the gap, but the weather rapidly worsened. A severe gale swept the area, creating extremely hazardous conditions for flight operations. Launching aircraft in such a storm carried significant risk, and recovering them afterward was even more perilous. Despite the danger, the urgency of the mission could not be ignored. If Bismarck escaped, the strategic consequences for Britain could be severe. At 1450, 15 Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers from the 810, 818, and 820 squadrons lifted off. The carrier's deck pitched dramatically with the waves, rising and falling sometimes as much as 40 feet, while the ship rolled violently. Several planes nearly failed to take off, but all eventually ascended into the stormy sky to begin their mission. Wave of 15 Swordfish took off. By then, the storm had intensified further. Winds neared 60 miles per hour with violent gusts, while heavy rain reduced visibility drastically. Pilots often struggled to see even the tips of their own wings. The sea was equally formidable. Towering waves approached 40 feet, forming walls of water that threatened to overtake the aircraft. Darkness fell. Cockpit instruments were hard to read, and rain streamed across controls and compasses. In normal circumstances, flying in these conditions would have been forbidden due to the high risk of losing control, structural failure, or crashing into the sea. Despite the conditions, the mission was critical. If Bismarck reached the French coast, the consequences for Britain could be disastrous. Each Swordfish crew had to navigate individually, battling the elements more than coordinating in formation. Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat later recalled the challenge of maintaining stability. Turbulence shook the fragile biplane violently, rain drenched the crew, and freezing fingers made controlling the aircraft exceptionally difficult. The Swordfish were outdated by modern standards, with fabric-covered wings over metal frames, yet their construction endured the storm. The wings flexed under the force of the wind, and the airframes groaned, but none failed. Around 2005, the German battleship finally came into view. Bismarck's silhouette loomed against the dark clouds, with her anti-aircraft guns opening fire. The slow speed of the Swordfish, once a disadvantage, now worked to their advantage, disrupting German targeting systems designed for faster planes. Their second hit near the stern, jamming the rudder at approximately 12 degrees to port. Flooding in the steering compartment was severe, and damage control teams were unable to restore functionality. Captain Ernst Lindemann ordered emergency measures, and engineers attempted to steer the ship by varying the propeller speeds, but the vessel could only move slowly and in wide circles. Divers attempted to inspect the damage directly, but the rough seas made this impossible. Crews tried improvised solutions on the steering mechanism, all without success. With the rudder disabled, Bismarck's maximum speed dropped to roughly 10 to 12 knots, leaving the battleship unable to maneuver effectively or escape the British pursuit. Admiral Gunther Lütjen sent a grim report to Berlin. Bismarck had lost her primary means of steering. British forces were closing in, and without a functioning rudder, the outcome seemed inevitable. For decades, debate persisted over which Swordfish crew had delivered the crippling torpedo. John Moffat was frequently credited, as his attack came from the port side during the first wave. Later investigations, including a 2002 expedition led by filmmaker James Cameron, suggested the fatal damage to the steering compartment was on the starboard side. Only 2 British pilots had approached from that direction, Sub-Lieutenants Kenneth Patterson and Douglas Godfrey Fawcett. With multiple torpedoes hitting the battleship, the precise identity of the decisive attacker may never be confirmed. As the assault, yet no crew members were lost. The following day, May 27, British battleships finally engaged the crippled German battleship. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney unleashed their main batteries, while Bismarck, unable to maneuver, attempted to return fire. After about 2 hours, the vessel was reduced to a burning wreck and sank at 10:39 a.m., claiming over 2,000 lives. Only 115 sailors survived. The German fleet's pride was gone, and the danger it posed to Allied convoys in the Atlantic ended. Remarkably, the decisive role was played by the slow and seemingly outdated Swordfish biplane. Throughout the war, Swordfish aircraft remained operational, adapting to new tasks. In the Mediterranean, units based on carriers and Malta regularly disrupted Axis supply lines. Night raids targeted convoys carrying fuel, ammunition, vehicles, and food to Rommel's Afrika Korps. Crews flew under darkness, poor weather, and heavy defenses, often combining radar detection with low-level torpedo or bombing runs. Between May and November 1941, 830 Squadron alone destroyed approximately 110,000 tons of Axis shipping. Across the theater, Swordfish missions were responsible for sinking an estimated 300,000. 450,000 tons of enemy merchant vessels, significantly hampering Axis logistics and contributing to Rommel's repeated complaints about fuel and ammunition shortages. In the Atlantic, Swordfish took on anti-submarine duties aboard escort carriers. Fitted with ASV-2 radar, they could locate surfaced U-boats at night or in poor visibility. By September 1944, Swordfish from Vindex had sunk 4 U-boats in a single mission. These accomplishments came at high cost. During Operation Cerberus in February 1942, German capital ships attempted a daring channel dash from Brest to Germany. 6 Swordfish from 825 Squadron, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, attacked in daylight with minimal fighter cover against overwhelming enemy defenses. All 6 aircraft were shot down within 20 minutes. 13 of 18 crew members died. While the mission failed to halt the German fleet, Esmond posthumously received the Victoria Cross, and the survivors were awarded for their valor. By the end of the European War in 1945, the Swordfish had flown nearly a decade of frontline service. Production of the aircraft reached 2,391 units before ceasing in August 1944. Attempts to replace it, including the faster Albacore, were short-lived. Despite being slow, open-cockpit biplanes in an era of all-metal monoplanes, Swordfish aircraft remained reliable, easy to maintain, and operationally versatile. Pilots and crews valued their simple design and predictable handling, which allowed for safe completion of missions under extreme conditions. The success of the Swordfish was never about its speed or technology. It rested on the skill, discipline, and courage of its crew. Pilots, observers, and gunners underwent intensive training in navigation, torpedo attacks, and carrier operations. The aircraft remained in service from 1936 until the end of the war, outlasting more advanced designs. Its legacy lies not only in the victories it achieved, but also in demonstrating that courage, skill, and tactical ingenuity often outweigh raw technological superiority.